Right, so we're getting straight into this, and here I'm cutting out the neck profile for this guitar that I'm making. It's a multi-laminate neck with maple sandwiching some Indian Rosewood with a couple of strips of veneers in between the pieces just for a bit of prettiness. And I'm just working my way through the blank and revealing the shape that I want the guitar neck to be. Now I've got this speeded up, so I'm not just absolutely throwing this through the bandsaw. So don't try and copy this because it won't work very well. So I've just released the headstock and the volute, and now I'm going down the back of the neck to put in the thickness for the neck profile, and then we swing it around the heel, and now I'm just doing the start of the heel block. So now that's all done, we've got it mounted on a template, and we'll be finishing the profile using a bearing cutter on the router. So now I'm just checking the cutter height just to get it going, and making sure I've got clearance and the proper height set. And again, this is sped up several times, so I'm not forcing it through the router, it's just going a bit faster than normal. But the trick with this is to take small cuts a little bit at a time to get to where you want it to be, because if you try and take too much at one time, then it goes wrong very quickly. And obviously this is balanced on quite a thin template, so I'm trying to be as careful as I can, because you don't want it falling over or slipping at an odd angle into the cutter, because you'll get divots and chip outs and all sorts of craziness that are no good. Router tables don't have to be scary as long as you're careful and don't try and take too much material at once, especially when you're doing something like this that's narrow, so you don't have a lot of surface area to balance it on. And the main problem I have here is the neck blank I'm using is too wide, or wider than the reach for the router cutter that I've got. So you have to be a bit creative on how you do the full width of cut that you need. So in a sec, what I'm going to do is remove the template, because I'm getting to the stage where I've got enough of the material removed so I can save the half-inch depth that the blank is taking up, and get an extra little bit of cut. But you see, I'm doing tiny cuts at a time, going as slowly and carefully as I can. The last thing you want to do is cause any chip out, or you get some grain going the wrong way and you're just going to rip a massive chunk out of the neck blank, which is really annoying. So nice and slow, keep it steady. That was stressful. Using a router table or a router handheld, you have to give it utmost respect all the time, and when you're rating something that's balanced on a template that's only that wide, you have to be really careful. So it's I'm always glad to get that bit over and done with, to be honest. But the profile is pretty much in. A bit of tidying up to do. Had to change to a top mounted bearing bit halfway through, because the bit isn't quite long enough to get all the way up the blank. So I've remarked my centre lines and the headstock shape as well, so I know where I am. And now that's in, I can think about getting the truss rod access sorted out, which should be a bit easier this time because I've managed to find a guide bush mounting plate that I was missing from the last video, so I can use the jig to get it exactly where I want it, so I don't have to use a hand drill to do that. I can rate it and then drill through, so I can get the depth so it matches the truss rod slot and things, so it all mates up as it should. Okay, so back to voiceover. Getting the little trim router I got recently, which is an awesome bit of kit. I did a video review of that a while ago, so go and check that out if you're interested in it. But it's an awesome piece of kit. That I'm using the guide bush and the jig to rate in the truss rod access. I've set the depth to the same as the truss rod slot, so I know that they'll match up. And now I'm using a 6mm Famag long drill bit to go through the back of where I rated, underneath where the nut will sit, so that we can get access to the truss rod, which is always a bit of a dicey drill, but as long as you're careful, you'll be okay. Right, so the truss access is done on the neck. The next thing I want to do is quickly get the fretboard to the right thickness. It's currently about like 7.25, so I need it at 5mm for the fingerboard. So that means we get the surfacing thicknessing jig out that I made a while ago. Bit rough and ready, but it does the job with my big surfacing bit that's a bit of a beast. Let's get you fitted in. And again, I've said it before, but when you're putting a bit in the rotor, you don't have to absolutely wrench the thing tight. Right, so this jig I made for myself, I use it as a flattening or thicknessing jig. It's quite simple, just some MDF with some rails on the sides and a cradle for the rotor to sit in. But it means I can get things like fretboards or veneers to the correct thickness quite quickly, although it does make a bit of a mess. So now I've got the fingerboard down to around 5.5mm. I've marked how long it needs to be, and I'm just getting it to length on the bandsaw. Again, back on the belt sander just to tidy the ends up and get it squared off. I've said it before, but that is a great bit of kit. I really recommend getting one. Truss rod in. I'm just putting a bit of masking tape over the truss rod channel just to keep any glue from seeping in there and making it seize up. And when you're spreading glue, you don't need a huge amount because of how it works. Generally what I try and do is spread it out so I can still see the grain of the wood through the glue, and then that should be more than enough. So get it lined up and get some clamps on, spreading the pressure along. It's better to start at one end and work towards the other. Sometimes if you put a clamp at each end and then go back towards the middle, you can cause like a bow, just because of the way the pressure is spreading itself out. So, and after a while, glue's cured, so off come the clamps. Now, getting rid of these F clamps first, get them out of the way. We get the triggers off and we see what we've got. Just checking with the fretboard template that I've got and marking where we've got to go, because now we're back on the bandsaw cutting out close to the final shape. So again, starting with the headstock, careful, 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 there you go. And then once you've got a bit of room, you can just go straight down the side and get the shape out. One of the most useful things I got myself was a white pencil for marking on some of the like darker woods. It does make life a bit easier when you're trying to mark out where you're going. A HB sometimes you can't see it against the grain, so and just being careful there, because the bandsaw wants to pull the blank down into the table, so being careful. But we've got the blank out, and now using the masking tape trick so I can get the next shape template on and get the final shape that we're looking for. So get the tape in, burnish it down just so it goes nice and smooth, and do the same on the template, making sure that you've got the template the right way up, because yeah, putting it on the wrong side of the template is annoying. So for this, sometimes I use super glue, sometimes I use double-sided tape, depends on what I'm doing. Super glue is stronger, but obviously if you put too much glue in, or it spooges out the sides, it can cause a bit more of a mess. So if you are using super glue, tiny amounts is more than enough, and keep it in the middle of the tape so that you can control where it goes, and just lining things up carefully with the center lines. And then once that's cured and it's solid, we're back to the router table, and we can finally see what the neck is going to look like. So that's a radian router bit that I've got there, which are simply the best router bits I've ever used. They're phenomenal. They keep their edge, and they're just really precise and really, really good. So I really recommend getting them. And again, just nibble away, small amounts at a time. Don't try and remove too much material, and you're left with a much cleaner finish. It's always difficult, this part, because when you've got separation between what you're cutting and the template you're using, you have to be really careful, because it's very easy for the bit to cause chip out. Now I've got this speeded up slightly for convenience, but even there you can see I'm going really slowly, and obviously keep your fingers well away from the cutter, because you don't want to be losing a finger. Although it's not really a proper project until you've bled on it, but even so, you got a router bit going at 30,000 RPM, it's going to be messy. So slow and steady, be careful, and use the preceding cut to lead you into the next one. And using a router table, you have to be aware, but it's it is safe and stable. It's usually the operator stupidity that causes problems, so give it the respect it deserves, and you'll have no problems. Let's get the template off. Gently, gently. Little bit of tidying up to do. Bit of burn on the end grain around the heel, but most of that's going to go anyway when I remove that section to fit under the neck pickup. Bit of tidying up around the end of the headstock. It's always difficult when you're trying to use a router bit that high up off the template. Let's see where we are. I'd like the neck pocket tighter, there's things we can do to solve that. Now that's done, we can get the neck marked out and get it ready for carving. Right, so I've done some more work on the neck and I'm now drilling the holes for the side dots. So I've got my jig set up and lined up, ready to go. Making sure that I have lined up the right frets so the dots are in the right place. And I've got a 2mm bit in my hand drill. These give you a bit more control than a battery drill, because it's easy for them to get away from you, but these are a little bit more stable. So line it up in the jig, give it a few turns forwards and then a little bit back. And then it's just rinse and repeat. So yeah, I'll do the last few and then we can get on to fretting. Okay, so holes are all drilled. So now I'm going to be putting in some white plastic side dots. Now, obviously I'm down towards the end of these couple of rods I've been using, and when you cut them, the ends tend to get a bit messed up. So I'm just tidying those up, just so I can make it fit into the hole. Got a glue bottle with a precision applicator and tiny hammer just to encourage it in. Okay, so I'm now installing the frets. I'll use the compression method for getting the frets in. I've got some Jescar medium jumbo frets. So the slots for them are 0.5 mm, and with the tangs on the frets they're literally like 0.53 of a mil or something, so they shouldn't have any problems with gripping into the wood. And then I'll wick some glue with dust or whatever into the edges afterwards once I've tidied and carved the neck, just to fill the gaps and make it all homogeneous. So I've done most of the frets already, well 7 of them actually, not most, 7 is not most of 22. So the slots are cleaned out, and these lengths of fret wire come with a pre-radius to them. Now you need the frets to be a slightly tighter radius than the fretboard that you're putting them into, which these are of checked. So if they're not, then you use a fret bender or pliers or something to give them a bit more of a curve. But basically what you do is you tap the fret into the slot and then use the fret setter to make sure it's seated correctly. So I'm trimming the ends of the frets as I go along, because when you get up to the dusty end of the fingerboard, obviously they get a lot closer together, so it's more difficult to get the nippers in. So locate the fret in the slot and give it a tap at each end. And when you're trimming the frets down, it's important that you keep the cutters straight and vertical as you can, because you don't want the fret twisting like that, because if the fret twists, then it can pull itself out of the slot and damage the fingerboard, which none of us want. Right, so now we've got the length fret we want. Another couple of taps on the ends, and then you start in the middle and go to the edges. And then I use the fret setter, which has got a notch in the end that sits over the crown of the fret, and again go from the middle. And you're looking for the consistent tone in the hit all the way along, and then just visually check that we're in. And then if there's excess coming out the fingerboard, because hammering into the middle of the fret and going to the edges, it compresses the fret down, so it's going to splay a small amount. So as I said, I'm trimming them as I go. Oh, ping. Just because it makes life a little bit easier when you get further up the fingerboard. Now, the other thing, these little fret offcuts are incredibly sharp, and you need to make sure that you gather them all up and get rid of them before you do anything, because these things have got a tendency to get stuck everywhere, and if you don't notice one and you've done some finishing or whatever, you don't want to put your guitar down on one of these, because it will just absolutely trash the work you've just done. So just check the slot. Just check the slot is clean. Tap tap. Trim. And then hammer away. So that's how I install frets. So I'll get the rest of these in. Right, so got all the frets in and looking pretty good. Trimmed them down, and I need to get rid of these sharp edges. To do that, we get the file out and
before you know these in.
So we'll keep going with this until we've got both sides down flush with the edges of the fretboard. Okay, so fret ends are now filed down flush with the fingerboard, and basically I keep going until I rub my thumb up the end of the fret like that, and it should feel, well, smooth basically, so you know there's nothing sticking out the side or sprouting out. Now you're still going to get sharpness going that way because these ends are still like unfinished, but we'll get to that when we do the bevel on the edge and then start rounding the fret ends over. One final thing I'm just going to check is, obviously you've been, or I've been rather, you know, I've been hammering frets into this fingerboard, so I just want to check that the neck is still flat. So get the notch straight edge on. Yeah. Quick look all the way along. And yeah, we're good. So there we can get it marked up and start carving some profile into the neck.